"You're not really family, Evelyn. You're just Ryan's mother." Those were the words that changed everything. Nicole said them with a smile during what was supposed to be a happy family dinner, and for a moment the entire table went quiet. The soft music playing through the restaurant speakers suddenly seemed too loud. The laughter from nearby tables felt distant. I looked down at my glass of iced tea and carefully set it back on the table without making a sound. At 68 years old, I had learned that some wounds were too deep for immediate reactions. Across from me, my son Ryan shifted in his seat. I waited for him to say something. I waited for him to laugh and tell his wife she had gone too far. I waited for him to remind everyone that I was the woman who had raised him, worked 2 jobs after his father passed away, and spent decades putting family before myself. But Ryan said nothing. He simply stared at his dinner plate. That silence hurt more than Nicole's words ever could. The dinner had started pleasantly enough. We were gathered at a waterfront restaurant overlooking the harbor outside Charleston. The sunset painted the water in shades of orange and gold. Families filled the outdoor patio, enjoying the warm summer evening. Our own family was celebrating an upcoming reunion cruise, a week-long vacation that would bring together relatives from across the country. Everyone seemed excited. Everyone except me. For months I had noticed little things. Conversations stopping when I entered a room. Plans being discussed after I had already left. Family group messages I somehow never received. At first I convinced myself I was imagining it. Age can make a person doubt their instincts. But deep down I knew something had changed. Nicole had become the center of every decision, every gathering, every tradition. And somehow, without anyone openly saying it, I had been pushed farther and farther toward the edges. Nicole didn't mean anything by it, my sister-in-law whispered beside me after the comment. She offered a nervous smile. I returned the smile politely. "Of course not," I said. My voice sounded calm, even to me. Nicole leaned back in her chair and continued talking about excursion packages and dinner reservations as though nothing unusual had happened. The rest of the family slowly joined the conversation again. Within minutes, everyone was laughing. Everyone except me. I glanced around the table and studied each face carefully. My nephew, my cousin, my grandchildren, Ryan. They all seemed comfortable moving on, as if the comment had been perfectly reasonable, as if I truly didn't belong. That realization settled heavily in my chest. Not like anger, not even sadness. Something colder, something clearer. The waiter arrived with dessert menus. Nicole immediately started discussing which specialty dining experiences everyone should reserve during the cruise. She spoke confidently, making decisions for the entire group. Listening to her, a strange thought crossed my mind. Every reservation, every flight, every cabin, every ticket connected to this vacation carried one name. Mine. Months earlier, when the reunion was first suggested, everyone agreed it would be easier if I handled the bookings. I had organized family trips for years. I kept track of schedules, payments, confirmations, and travel documents. Nobody questioned it. Nobody offered to help. They simply assumed I would take care of everything just as I always had. I looked out across the harbor. A large cruise ship sat in the distance, glowing beneath the fading sunlight. The sight made me smile. Not because I was happy, because for the first time that evening I understood something important. They believed I needed their acceptance. They believed I would quietly absorb every insult to keep the peace. They believed I would continue paying, planning, and sacrificing no matter how they treated me. And sitting there beneath the evening sky, listening to Nicole explain why I wasn't really family, I decided they were about to discover how wrong they were. They thought the conversation was over. It had only just begun. The drive home from the restaurant took a little over 30 minutes, but it felt much longer that night. The streets of Charleston were quiet, and the glow of the streetlights stretched across the windshield as I made my way back to the house. I did not turn on the radio. I did not call anyone. I simply drove in thought. When I pulled into my driveway, the porch light greeted me exactly as it had every evening for the past 12 years. After my husband passed away, I kept that light on every night. It made the house feel less empty. I unlocked the front door and stepped inside. The familiar scent of lemon furniture polish lingered in the air. Family photographs lined the hallway. Ryan's high school graduation, his college ceremony, his wedding day. I paused in front of the wedding photograph longer than usual. Nicole stood beside him in a white dress, smiling brightly. I remembered how excited I had been that day. I remembered welcoming her into our family without hesitation. Looking back now, I wondered if she had ever truly accepted me in return. I hung my purse by the door and walked into the kitchen. The clock above the stove read 9:42 p.m. I poured myself a cup of chamomile tea and sat at the small oak table where I often started my mornings. The silence in the house felt different that evening. Not lonely. Not sad. Clear. Almost peaceful. Sometimes the truth arrives all at once. Other times it reveals itself through years of small moments that only make sense when viewed together. As I sat there, memories began lining up in my mind. Last Thanksgiving, Nicole had changed the seating arrangement and placed me at the far end of the table while everyone else sat together. She called it a space issue. A few months later, I discovered the family had taken a weekend trip to Asheville. I learned about it from photographs online. Ryan told me it had been a last-minute decision. Then there was Emma's 16th birthday party. Nicole had forgotten to send me the invitation until the day before the event. At the time, I accepted every explanation. I wanted harmony. I wanted to believe the best about people I loved. But now those memories look different. They no longer felt accidental. They felt connected. My eyes drifted toward a folder resting on the kitchen counter. Inside were printed confirmations for the upcoming reunion cruise, airline reservations, cabin assignments, transportation, schedules, months of planning. I had spent countless afternoons comparing prices, coordinating dates, and making sure every family member could attend. Some relatives were flying from Oregon. Others were traveling from Michigan, Texas, and Florida. It had taken patience and organization to make everything work. I opened the folder and slowly reviewed the documents. My name appeared on every page. Primary contact, booking manager, payment holder, emergency coordinator. I smiled faintly, not because I was pleased, because I finally understood something I should have recognized sooner. They had been happy to accept my help, happy to accept my money, happy to accept my time. What they did not value was me. The distinction mattered. Around 10:30, my phone vibrated. A text message from Ryan appeared on the screen. Hope you got home safely. Good dinner tonight. I stared at the message for several seconds. Good dinner tonight. Not a word about what Nicole had said. Not a word about the silence that followed. I set the phone face down on the table without responding. Outside, a gentle summer breeze rustled the trees beyond my kitchen window. The neighborhood was settling in for the night. Somewhere down the street, a dog barked once and then everything became quiet again. I gathered the reservation papers into a neat stack and returned them to the folder. Then I placed the folder beside my coffee maker where I could see it in the morning. For the first time in years, I was no longer wondering whether I belonged. They had already answered that question for me. The only thing left was deciding what I was going to do about it. The next morning, I woke up earlier than usual. Sunlight filtered through the kitchen curtains, casting pale golden stripes across the floor. I brewed a pot of coffee and stood quietly beside the window while the neighborhood slowly came to life. A man jogged past with his dog. A school bus stopped at the corner. Everything looked normal. Yet something inside me had changed. For years, I had been telling myself that family relationships were complicated, that misunderstandings happened, that people became busy. Those explanations had allowed me to ignore what was right in front of me. But once you see a pattern clearly, it becomes impossible to unsee it. After breakfast, I opened my laptop and logged into the travel account I had created for the reunion cruise. Reservation numbers filled the screen. 14 travelers. 7 cabins. Flights arriving from 6 different cities. Months of coordination sat neatly organized inside folders and spreadsheets. I remembered every phone call, every schedule adjustment, every time someone called me asking for help. Nicole had never once volunteered to handle any part of the planning. Ryan had not either. They simply expected everything to be ready. Looking through the documents, I noticed something else. My own cabin had been quietly changed. Originally, I had selected a balcony room near several relatives. 2 months earlier, someone had requested modifications. My room had been moved to a smaller cabin at the opposite end of the ship. I stared at the update for several seconds. Nobody had mentioned it to me. Nobody had asked if I agreed. I clicked deeper into the records. More changes appeared. Group dining reservations had been rearranged. Excursions had been updated. Seating assignments had shifted. Somehow everyone remained together while I had been placed farther away. Separately, none of those changes seemed significant. Together, they painted a different picture. Around noon, my phone rang. It was Emma. My granddaughter rarely called during the school week, which immediately caught my attention. "Grandma, are you busy?" she asked. "Not at all," I said. "How are you?" She hesitated. "I am okay. I just wanted to check on you after dinner." Her voice sounded nervous. I smiled despite myself. Emma had always been observant. Even as a child, she noticed things others missed. "That is very thoughtful," I replied. "I am doing fine." Another pause followed. Then she spoke more quietly. "Grandma, can I ask you something?" "Of course." "Did Nicole's comment upset you?" I looked out the window again. "Why do you ask?" Emma exhaled slowly. "Because nobody should have said that to you." For a moment, neither of us spoke. Hearing those words felt strangely comforting. Not because they erased the hurt, but because someone had noticed. Someone had seen what happened and recognized it was wrong. We talked for another 20 minutes about school, friends, and college plans. Before hanging up, Emma said something that stayed with me long after the call ended. Sometimes people get so comfortable with someone's kindness that they stop appreciating it. After we said goodbye, I sat quietly at the kitchen table. Her words echoed in my mind. Comfortable with someone's kindness. That was exactly what had happened. Not only with Nicole. With many of them. They had become accustomed to my support, my planning, my generosity. They expected it the same way people expect the sun to rise each morning. Reliable. Automatic. Permanent. I glanced toward the folder containing every reservation for the trip. Then I looked back at the empty chair across from me. The house remained silent. For the first time, that silence no longer felt lonely. Felt like clarity. And clarity can be a very powerful thing. Later that afternoon, I decided to stop wondering and start paying attention. There is a difference. Wondering keeps you trapped inside your own thoughts. Paying attention gives you answers. I carried my laptop into the living room and settled into the armchair beside the window. The same chair where my husband used to read the Sunday paper. The same chair where we planned family vacations long before smartphones and online reservations existed. Back then, family trips felt simple. People were grateful just to spend time together. I opened my email and began reviewing months of correspondence related to the cruise. Hundreds of messages filled the folder. Flight confirmations. Hotel arrangements. Transportation schedules. Excursion options. At first, everything appeared normal. Then I noticed a separate email chain I had somehow overlooked. It involved Nicole, Ryan, and several relatives. My name appeared only occasionally. Most of the planning happened without me, even though I was managing the bookings. I read carefully. One message discussed group dinners on the ship. Another focused on shore excursions. Then I found something that made me sit perfectly still. Nicole had written, "Let us keep things simple. Evelyn likes doing her own thing anyway." The message was followed by several thumbs-up responses. I stared at the sentence. I had never once said I wanted to be separated from the family. In fact, the entire reason I agreed to organize the trip was because I believed it would bring everyone together. Yet somehow a different story had been created. A version of me that preferred distance. A version that made exclusion seem reasonable. My stomach tightened. Not from anger. From disappointment. The most painful lies are often the quiet ones. The ones told so often that people begin accepting them as truth. I continued scrolling. More examples appeared. Seating arrangements. Activity groups. Transportation plans. Every adjustment seemed small on its own. Together they formed a pattern that was impossible to ignore. Around 4 o'clock, another message arrived. This one came from Nicole herself. "Just checking in. We need final headcounts by Friday. Hope everything is on track." I almost laughed. There was not a single mention of our dinner conversation. Not a hint of concern. Not even basic courtesy. Only logistics. only expectations. As if my role existed solely to make things convenient for everyone else. I closed the message without replying. Then I walked into the kitchen and prepared an early dinner. Grilled chicken, a baked potato, steamed vegetables. Simple food. Familiar food. While the potato baked, I found myself thinking about Ryan as a little boy. He used to follow me everywhere. Grocery stores, hardware stores, parent meetings. He would hold my hand and ask endless questions about the world. Back then, if someone had hurt my feelings, he would have been the first person to defend me. The memory brought a sad smile to my face. Children grow up. People change. Sometimes so gradually that you barely notice until one day they feel like strangers. After dinner, I returned to the travel folder sitting on my kitchen counter. I opened it again and reviewed every reservation one more time. 14 travelers. 7 cabins. Flights scheduled from multiple states. Thousands of dollars already. Processed. Months of effort. Everything rested under my authority as the booking holder. For a long moment I simply looked at the paperwork. Then I noticed something I had not paid attention to before. A cancellation policy document attached to one of the confirmations. I picked it up and began reading line by line. By the time I reached the final page, a very different kind of clarity settled over me. The trip was not as permanent as everyone seemed to believe. In fact, several important decisions remained entirely in my hands. I folded the document carefully and placed it back inside the folder. Outside, evening shadows stretched across the yard as the sun slowly disappeared behind the trees. Inside my quiet kitchen, a plan was beginning to take shape. The following morning arrived cool and bright. I woke before sunrise and sat on my back porch with a cup of coffee while the neighborhood remained quiet. The cancellation policy document rested on the small table beside me. I had read it 3 times the night before and twice more that morning. Every detail mattered. Every deadline mattered. Most importantly, every major decision still required authorization from the primary booking holder. Me. I found that fact strangely comforting. Not because I wanted control. Because for the first time in months I realized I had not lost it. Around 8 o'clock my phone began buzzing with family messages. A cousin wanted information about luggage limits. An uncle needed help choosing seats for a connecting flight. Someone else asked about transportation from the airport to the cruise terminal. I answered each message politely, the same way I always had. Helpful. Organized. Reliable. Yet something felt different now. As I responded, I noticed that not one person asked how I was doing. Not one person mentioned the dinner. Not one person acknowledged what Nicole had said. Their questions were all about the trip, the arrangements, the details, the services I provided. By late morning, I had answered 14 separate messages. Then another arrived from Nicole. Just making sure everyone is set. Thank you for keeping everything organized. I stared at the screen. It was the first time she had thanked me in months. Somehow it felt less like gratitude and more like a reminder that she expected the machine to keep running. I set the phone aside and walked into my home office. Filing cabinets lined one wall. Family photographs covered another. In the center sat my desk, where I had spent countless hours organizing holidays, birthdays, reunions, and family gatherings over the years. I opened a drawer and pulled out an old notebook. Inside were records of vacations stretching back nearly 20 years. Disney trips, beach rentals, mountain cabins, anniversary celebrations. Looking through those pages, I noticed a pattern that extended far beyond this cruise. I had planned nearly everything, coordinated nearly everything, paid deposits when others could not afford them, solved problems before anyone else even knew they existed. I had convinced myself that service was the same thing as belonging. Now I understood the difference. Shortly after lunch, Emma called again. This time her voice sounded hesitant. "Grandma, can I tell you something?" she asked. "Of course," I replied. She lowered her voice. "Please do not tell anyone I said this." My grip tightened slightly around the phone. "I will not." There was a brief pause. Then she continued. "A few weeks ago, Nicole was talking about the cruise with some relatives. She said once everything was booked, nobody would have to worry about your opinions anymore." The room became very still. Outside my office window, a squirrel ran across the fence. Somewhere down the street, a lawnmower hummed in the distance. Life continued as normal. Yet Emma's words settled heavily inside me. Not because they surprised me, because they confirmed what I already suspected. This had never been about one careless comment at dinner. The comment had simply revealed what people were already thinking. After we ended the call, I sat quietly for several minutes. Then I opened the travel account one more time. Names filled the screen. Flight numbers. Cabin assignments. Payment records. Months of work. I studied everything carefully. No anger. No tears. Just clarity. Then I picked up the phone and located the customer service number listed on the reservation documents. My finger hovered above the call button for several seconds. Outside, sunlight streamed across my desk and illuminated the stack of travel confirmations. Inside the quiet room, a decision that had been forming for days finally settled into place. I pressed the button and listened as the line began to ring. The customer service representative answered after only a few minutes. Her voice was cheerful and professional. She confirmed my identity, verified the booking information, and reviewed the reservation details with me one final time. I listened carefully as she explained the cancellation terms. Some portions of the payments would be refunded. Others would become future travel credits. Everything was completely legitimate. Everything followed the policies that had been agreed to months earlier. When she asked if I wished to proceed, I looked around my quiet office. Family photographs watched from the shelves. The afternoon sun rested across the hardwood floor. For a brief moment, I thought about all the opportunities people had been given to treat me differently. All the chances they had to show basic respect. Then I answered calmly, "Yes, please proceed." The representative completed the process step by step. Flight reservations disappeared first. Then transportation bookings. Then the cruise cabins themselves. One by one, the confirmations that had taken months to arrange were removed from the system. It took less than 30 minutes. Months of planning vanished in the time it takes to watch a television show. When the call ended, I thanked her for her assistance and placed the phone back on my desk. That was all. No dramatic speech. No angry message. No announcement. I simply closed my laptop and went about the rest of my day. I watered the flowers on my back porch. I visited the grocery store. I picked up a prescription from the pharmacy. By evening, I was sitting in my living room reading a mystery novel while rain tapped softly against the windows. My phone remained silent. The trip was still several days away. Nobody had noticed anything yet. The following morning felt unusually peaceful. I made pancakes for breakfast and spent several hours working in my garden. The roses needed trimming, and the tomato plants had grown taller than expected. Around noon, Emma stopped by unexpectedly. She carried a small bakery box containing lemon muffins from a local shop. We sat together on the porch and talked about school, summer plans, and college applications. She seemed happier than she had during our recent phone calls. Before leaving, she hugged me tightly. "You seem different lately, Grandma," she said. I smiled. "Do I?" She nodded. "Calmer." After she left, I thought about that word. Calmer. Perhaps she was right. For weeks I had been carrying confusion, disappointment, and self-doubt. Now those feelings had been replaced by certainty. Certainty does not always make life easier, but it does make decisions simpler. 3 days passed. Then 2. Departure day finally arrived. Early that morning I woke before sunrise and brewed a fresh pot of coffee. According to the original schedule, several family members would already be heading toward airports across the country. Others would be checking luggage and printing boarding passes. I sat quietly at my kitchen table and watched the steam rise from my coffee mug. At exactly 6:17 a.m. my phone rang. Ryan's name appeared on the screen. I let it ring. Seconds later, a text message arrived. "Mom, call me immediately." Another call followed. Then another. By 6:30 messages began arriving from cousins, aunts, and uncles. Some sounded confused. Others sounded concerned. Nobody sounded calm. I looked down at the growing list of notifications filling my screen. Outside, the morning sun was beginning to rise above the trees. Inside my kitchen, the coffee remained warm. My phone vibrated again. This time Nicole's name appeared. I stared at it for several seconds before setting the phone face down on the table. It continued buzzing against the wood while a small smile slowly crossed my face. It seemed the first signs of panic had finally arrived. By 7 o'clock that morning, my phone looked as though it had developed a life of its own. Calls arrived every few minutes. Text messages stacked on top of one another so quickly that I could barely read them. Some relatives were stranded at airports. Others were sitting at home trying to understand why their flight confirmations no longer existed. A few were already speaking with airline representatives who could offer little information beyond the fact that the original reservations had been canceled by the account holder. I poured myself another cup of coffee and carried it to the porch. The air felt fresh after the previous night's rain. Birds moved between the trees, completely unaware that half my family was experiencing the most chaotic morning they had faced in years. My phone rang again. This time it was my cousin Harold. Of all my relatives, Harold was usually the calmest. If he was calling repeatedly, I knew the situation had become serious. I answered. "Evelyn, what is going on?" he asked immediately. "Good morning, Harold," I replied. "Have you heard from Ryan?" There was a pause. Everybody has heard from Ryan. He says the reservations disappeared. I took a slow sip of coffee. That is correct. Another pause followed. Longer this time. You canceled them? Yes. Harold exhaled slowly. I suppose you had a reason. Unlike others, he did not sound angry. He sounded curious. I did, I said. Then perhaps people should listen before they start blaming you, he replied quietly. After we ended the call, I noticed something interesting. The tone of the messages gradually began changing. Earlier, people sounded frustrated and confused. Now some of them were asking questions. Real questions. Why would Evelyn do this? What happened? Did something occur at the family dinner? Around mid-morning, several relatives began calling one another. Information started spreading. Not the version Nicole preferred. The truth. Emma called shortly before noon. "Grandma, everyone is talking," she said. "About the trip?" I asked. "About everything." She lowered her voice. Aunt Linda told people what Nicole said at dinner. I leaned back in my chair. Did she? And Uncle Mark told everyone about the messages where Nicole kept excluding you from plans. The silence that followed felt different from previous silences. Not lonely. Not uncertain. Felt like a curtain slowly being pulled back. For years, many relatives had only seen fragments of the situation. Small incidents. Awkward moments. They had never seen the larger pattern because nobody connected the pieces. Now those pieces were finally being placed together. By early afternoon, another unexpected thing happened. Several relatives began apologizing. My cousin Diane left a voicemail saying she should have spoken up sooner. Aunt Linda sent a message admitting she had noticed Nicole's behavior for years, but convinced herself it was not her place to interfere. Even a few younger family members reached out privately to say they always felt uncomfortable with how I was treated. Reading those messages stirred something inside me. Not satisfaction. Sadness. Because it confirmed what I had suspected. People had seen more than I realized. They simply chose convenience over confrontation. Late that afternoon, Ryan finally left a voicemail. His voice sounded strained. "Mom, please call me. Everybody is upset. Nicole is upset. We need to fix this." I listened twice. What stood out was not what he said. It was what he did not say. He never asked if I was hurt. He never apologized. He never mentioned the dinner. His focus remained exactly where it had always been. The trip. The inconvenience. The consequences. I deleted the voicemail and set my phone aside. As the sun began lowering behind the trees, another message arrived. This one came from Nicole. Unlike the others, it contained only a single sentence. "We need to talk face to face." I stared at the screen for several moments before placing the phone down beside me. Somewhere, for the first time, Nicole was beginning to realize that control was slipping through her fingers. And for the first time in a very long while, she was no longer the one deciding what happened next. 2 days later, there was a knock on my front door. I already knew who it would be. The calls had slowed, the messages had become less frantic, and the family had finally pieced together enough of the story to understand that the problem was much larger than a canceled vacation. I opened the door and found Ryan standing on the porch. Nicole stood beside him. For the first time in years, she looked uncertain. Neither of them spoke immediately. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the driveway. Finally, Ryan cleared his throat. "Can we come in?" he asked. I stepped aside and allowed them into the house. We moved into the living room. The same room where Ryan had opened Christmas presents as a little boy. The same room where I had celebrated birthdays, graduations, and milestones for decades. Strange how familiar places can suddenly feel so different. Ryan sat on the edge of the couch. Nicole chose the chair across from me. I remained in my usual seat by the window. Nobody seemed eager to begin. Eventually Ryan spoke first. "Mom, everything has gotten out of control." I looked at him quietly. "Has it?" He rubbed his forehead. "People are angry. The family is divided. Everybody keeps talking about what happened." "They should," I replied. My calm answer seemed to catch him off guard. Nicole shifted in her chair. "Evelyn, we made mistakes." The words sounded rehearsed. Careful. Selected. I waited. She continued. "Things were said that should not have been said." Again I waited. Not once did she mention the actual comment. Not once did she take ownership of it. The room fell silent. Finally, I asked a simple question. "What exactly are you apologizing for?" Nicole opened her mouth but did not answer immediately. Ryan glanced toward her. The hesitation told me everything. They wanted peace. They wanted the conflict to disappear. What they did not want was accountability. "We all want to move forward," Ryan said. I nodded slowly. "That is interesting." "What do you mean?" he asked. I folded my hands in my lap. For years, moving forward always seemed to require me to ignore something. Neither of them responded. I continued. "A forgotten invitation. A changed reservation. A family event I learned about afterward. A dinner where I was told I was not family." Nicole looked down at the floor. Ryan stared at the coffee table. The silence grew heavier with each passing second. Then I asked the question that had been waiting between us ever since that night at the restaurant. "If I am not family, why are you here?" Neither answered immediately. Ryan's eyes finally met mine. For the first time in a very long while, I saw genuine discomfort. Not frustration. Not annoyance. Discomfort. The kind that comes when a person is forced to confront a truth they have spent years avoiding. Nicole swallowed hard. "You are family," she said quietly. "Then why was I treated like I was not?" I asked. Once again, neither had an answer. The clock on the wall ticked softly behind us. Outside, a breeze moved through the trees. Inside, years of excuses seemed to evaporate all at once. Eventually Ryan spoke. His voice sounded smaller than I had ever heard it. "I should have said something that night." I studied him carefully. "Yes," I said. "You should have." For several moments nobody moved. Then something shifted. Not forgiveness. Not reconciliation. Something more important. Honesty. For the first time, they were no longer defending what happened. They were finally forced to look directly at it. And that was when I realized the real lesson had never been about the trip. It was about teaching people that access to my kindness was not something they could simply assume would always be there. Several months passed after that conversation. Summer slowly gave way to autumn, and with it came a different rhythm to family life. The canceled cruise eventually stopped being the center of every discussion. People moved on to birthdays, school events, work schedules, and holiday plans. But something important had changed beneath the surface. For the first time in years, I stopped being the person who quietly absorbed everything. I stopped volunteering to organize every gathering. I stopped solving problems nobody even bothered to acknowledge. Most importantly, I stopped confusing sacrifice with love. One Saturday afternoon in October, I hosted a small barbecue in my backyard. Nothing extravagant. A few folding tables. A grill. Homemade potato salad. Fresh apple pie. The kind of gathering my husband always loved. The guest list was smaller than it would have been in previous years. That was intentional. I invited the people who had reached out. The people who had listened. The people who understood that respect mattered just as much as family connections. As relatives arrived throughout the afternoon, the atmosphere felt lighter than I remembered. There was no tension. No careful walking on eggshells. No pretending. People laughed naturally. Conversations flowed easily. Children played in the yard while adults sat beneath the shade trees sharing stories. At one point, I noticed Emma helping my aunt carry drinks from the kitchen. She caught my eye and smiled. It reminded me how much she had grown over the past few months. Not just older, wiser. Later, as the sun began to lower, Ryan arrived. Alone. He carried a tray of desserts from a local bakery and looked noticeably more nervous than he used to. Over the previous months, he had made genuine efforts to rebuild our relationship. Not through grand gestures. Through consistency. Regular phone calls. Honest conversations. Showing up when he said he would. Small things. Important things. We stood together near the grill for a few minutes watching children chase one another across the yard. "This feels different," he said quietly. "It does," I agreed. He nodded slowly. "I spent a long time thinking family would always be there no matter what." I looked at him. Many people believe that. He stared across the yard. "I understand now that relationships require maintenance. Just like anything else worth keeping." I smiled softly. It was not a perfect statement, but it was an honest one. And honesty mattered more than perfection ever could. Nicole never became especially close to me after everything that happened. Some distances once created never completely disappear. But she became more respectful, more aware, more careful with her words. Perhaps she finally understood that kindness is not weakness. Perhaps she learned that people eventually stop accepting treatment that diminishes them. Whatever the reason, the dynamic changed. As evening settled over the backyard, I sat alone for a few moments watching everyone talk and laugh beneath strings of warm lights. The scene looked simple, ordinary even, yet it felt meaningful in a way the cruise never could have. The trip had been about destinations, reservations, and schedules. This gathering was about something much deeper. Presence, respect, choice. I thought back to that dinner months earlier. The restaurant, the comment, the silence that followed. At the time it felt like a painful ending. Looking back now, I realized it had actually been a beginning. Sometimes people reveal exactly how they see you. When they do, the greatest gift you can give yourself is believing them. Not because it hurts less. Because it allows you to stop chasing acceptance from people who have already decided not to offer it. The evening air carried the scent of charcoal and fallen leaves as laughter drifted across the yard. I leaned back in my chair and watched the people around me. Family, I had finally learned, is not determined by obligation, convenience, or shared last names. Family is built through respect. And once respect disappears, no ticket, reservation, or vacation in the world can replace it.